Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. It is Monday, August 17th. We are on the Techthusiasm live podcast with a super special guest. Super special guest, Mr. Kris. So we're going to chat for the next hour or so, all about home theater stuff, video things, probably take a bunch of questions. Definitely going to spend some time talking about the cool, new, awesome Kaleidoscape Strato K and the 4K cinematic stuff that's been all the rage, and some debate and more over these last weeks. And so let's just jump right in. Welcome, Kris. Good to see you.
Thanks. I think you should have prepped me for your little thing coming in. I guess I haven't watched the show in a while, but I was sitting there like,
Well, yeah,
what is this?
yeah, that was the outcome, output of playing around with obviously some AI
Yeah.
video generation a couple weeks ago, or actually a couple months ago. That was Sora 2. I made some funny stuff and put it out on the channel just in shorts, but I haven't really done anything more with it. I need to. Sora 2 is actually down, but that one came out so cool. I'm like, oh, I have to use this for the podcast. So there it is.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
That was you singing though, right? That was not AI singing. That was you.
I wish I could say it was. No, that's entirely AI. That was like one prompt.
Oh, wow.
One prompt. Yeah. I can't believe they actually shut that down. That was the stuff that you could get out of Sora was pretty crazy and amazing. Yeah, I think I prompted him like, generate me a video that's a cool podcast intro with some flashy music, and this is what I talk about, and that was it. And in that platform, you did this thing where you could make an avatar of yourself. So literally, like, you scan your face and you say like 5 sentences, and then it completely has like your digital avatar.
Yeah, I
To
was working on there's a new audio calibration program from the OC. Is it the I can't remember his name on YouTube, but it's like the obsessive compulsive audiophile, I think his name is. But he's big on some of the forums where he's basically created this program that hacks Odyssey. So if you have like a Denon or a Marantz, he has like a complete program where it takes all the measurements, and then another one where it back ends into it and does a full audio calibration, as the gate. Odyssey is the gateway, but he's not using any of Odyssey's tools.
Okay.
And if you watch his videos on like how to set it up, it's clear that, like, it's him, but it's like AI, has used his image, and then, he's like sitting there talking from like a laptop or whatever. But
Yep.
you watch and you're like, okay, there's no way this is, actually him, but it's
Yeah.
probably is what he looks like. So it's the same kind of thing. So yeah, I haven't delved into AI at all, other than,
Yeah.
I ask my phone something every once in a while.
Yeah, but by virtue of what I have to do by day in software development, making tools, and leading my engineering teams and stuff, like I've been neck deep in AI for months
Oh, okay.
with you know capability. I do all these things and learning ins and outs and weaknesses. So it's very prevalent in a lot of my
Okay.
whether I like it or
Well,
not.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me
But
on. You
yeah.
had reached out a few weeks ago and asked about talking about the new Strato K and stuff. And when you had reached out, I was just about ready to go do some calibration tour, I believe, in California. But during
Mhm.
that tour, I actually met with the folks at Kaleidoscape for a follow-up meeting. I usually meet with them when I'm in the Bay Area. So we talked obviously about the new player and some other things that we can talk about. So
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. This, amongst all the questions, this is a big one. Formats and understanding formats, and what should people be looking for. I think once again, I think Kaleidoscape is a platform that has gotten more, as they introduce more players, gotten more complicated. The conversation with folks is about, okay, what's the right player? What do you need? What do you need it to do? And then now we have, you can buy a movie in the store and download one of 6 different formats. um, and which do you choose? And I actually have a video that I already filmed, kind of helping to navigate the fact that even you can choose the format that you want to download, because I think some folks even struggle with that, or the system is going to present you with whatever it thinks maybe is best for your system or based on your player, but that may not be the one that you want to choose. So um, yeah, let's rip into it. Share your thoughts on the Strato K, and particularly the 4K cinematic formats, and what your
Yeah, so
experience?
the Strato K was a surprise. I think it was a surprise for
Yeah.
everyone. I've seen some people sitting there saying that, like, oh, dealers, probably knew about this, and some people got suckered into buying other players. But
Mhm.
you and I are both direct dealers for Kaleidoscape, and we both found out probably the same time, that the
Yep.
day they literally announced it. So there
Exactly.
was some people that were talking about that, and I thought that was kind of funny that there was some like malicious intent or whatever, but that clearly wasn't the case. So yeah, it was a surprise. As I mentioned, I think in my text to you, I met with Kaleidoscape is probably roughly 2 years ago, I want to say, and I had a meeting with them where I wanted to sit down since I was going to be in the area and talk to them about things that I thought, you know, um, they could do with what they had at the time, or other things that, they just wanted, like, what was my general opinion on Kaleidoscape at the time? What were things that I would like to see maybe improved? You and I have even talked about stuff like this. Hey, I'd like to see them do this for the menus, or oh, I'd like to see them do this for that.
Yep.
So we had a general meeting where we were going to discuss that, and I wanted to come up with some things that I thought could help them break into, bringing more people into the platform, breaking into other markets, whatever,
Hmm.
and they were thrilled to sit down, and I sat down with them, the CEO and a bunch of other people that were in their engineering department. There was a bunch of people at this meeting,
Hmm.
and one of the first things that I brought up at there was, I asked them, what is their mezzanine file? And a mezzanine file, for anybody that doesn't know, is basically, the studio has a file that is essentially, here is the movie, and it's in a certain format, a certain quality, and things like that. And then Kaleidoscape or whoever else gets the mezzanine will then, basically compile it down to whatever their delivery system can be. So, if it's going to be, more compressed with that file, if it's from like a streaming service like a Netflix or an Apple, or whatever, and then Kaleidoscape does what they want with it. So I asked them, hey, when you get this file, what generally is the quality that's brought into? And in this case, I was talking, I was like, is this in 444? Is this in 422? Or anything like that, and that's describing the chroma resolution portion of it. We already know that the luma resolution of any of these is 3840 by 2160, which is standard 4K for consumer base and stuff. But I was curious about that, and at the time, I was told that most of the files, again, like, this is just people talking to me off the cuff, so there wasn't anybody sitting there like, checking this, was 422 bit. Um, so I said, okay, so if your mezzanine file is 422 bit, do you have the ability to deliver the content with the players you have at 422 native? And they
Hmm.
said no, that the chip that they had at the time was not capable of it. So one of the things that I said is like, well, to me, that's somewhere where, future development, could you, come up with something that does that? And the reason I did that is because one of the more, I guess, popular, arguments for against Kaleidoscape that you see is, I have a Plex. It's
Hmm.
basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, it is and it isn't. It is in the fact that it's a digital delivery thing where you can, see a library, press play, or whatever. Obviously,
Hmm.
there's more time consumed to get movies into Plex. You're limited by the content that you have at hand, if you're doing things, with any kind of legality or anything like that.
Yep.
But you're still, limited by the content. So, that's a disc quality level. And I've always told people, including my clients or anything else, that I always kind of, even though Kaleidoscape can have bigger file sizes and things, I always said that, for the most part, you're looking at disc quality with the convenience of digital,
Yep.
to kind of like, bring it down to the lowest level.
Hmm.
So I was like, well, if you could deliver something like this, you objectively now are delivering something that nobody else has. So it is something that can separate you from that. And even then at that meeting, I think I brought up like whether or not there would be a visual benefit subjectively, is debatable because, though the files, so anything that's on 4K Blu-ray disc or Blu-ray disc or any other consumer deliverable, you're looking at 420 for the chroma, which means that your chroma resolution is roughly half or less than the luma and stuff like that. But that's not really true because no matter what playback system you have, the player is always going to upconvert that chroma. So even though the file is 420, the player will always at a minimum upconvert to, to 422, if not 444. So in reality, having it with the new 4K cinematic format, if it, let's just hypothetically say it's 444, you're really comparing native 444 to upscale 444. And we as people aren't that sensitive to chroma. That's why we have that kind of compression, is because we can get away with it. Now, typically having a higher, like a true 422 or 444 really benefits more of like a graphics kind of thing. So it's really big in like the PC space, like if you're looking at graphics on your computer, text, icons, anything like there
Mhm.
would definitely be a noticeable difference if you were delivering that in 422 versus 444 on a display like this. But when we're talking about moving motion video, like just regular video playback, almost everything that you read from any kind of thing that's done any testing on it is like, there really isn't any visible, you would really take very special circumstances to see it, or something is doing something wrong. So back, a lot of people don't remember, but 20 years ago, I was working for Secrets of Home Theater and High Fidelity. There was the big thing when DVD first came around, where again, remember I said all players convert to 422 or 444. There was what was called the chroma bug, the chroma upsampling error bug. And it was basically how they were doing that upscale was creating issues where you would see like it looked like striping in colors and stuff like that. And that was part of the deinterlacing portion that was happening when we had interlaced products from DVD. So, that was pointed out and that was something we were testing at. It became a big thing and it's kind of a thing of the past. It did creep up when Blu-ray first came out, but they've since fixed that. So usually you don't see an issue with chroma upsampling unless there's something wrong with the upsampler. Now, again, like there's definitely a difference between all these things when you're looking at like a test pattern, which is
Mhm.
designed to like show these problems. But, looking at a test pattern that's at, full resolution Nyquist rate or whatever is different than motion video and things like that. So I looked at it as a way to objectively make a format that nobody else can say they can do, because then you could say like, hey, we can deliver something nobody else. I mean, that's kind of been Kaleidoscope's thing, where the ultimate video platform or whatever. Okay, well, this is something that would objectively say that you are better than what the other person does and stuff like that. So that was just one of a couple of different things that we talked about that day. And then obviously this came out to the surprise of me and you. And,
Mhm.
I reached out and I was like, hey, was this, this is what we talked about a couple of years ago. Were you guys already working on this or whatever? And it was like, no, no, this was direct from that meeting. So that was fantastic, because here's a company that like took feedback and rolled with it. Um, so the whole 422444 native, you know subjectively, as I've already kind of said, I just don't really think that there is anything really that you're going to subjectively notice from that specifically, because again, most of the content is moving video. But I also look at it as like lossy versus lossless.
Mhm.
So if you have like lossless audio and then you have a lossy encoder that's, not one that's just awful, or you're bit rate starving it or whatever else, the odds that you're going to be able to hear the difference between that is really, really low, especially if it's a good lossy encoder. But it's always better to start with more resolution. So it's one of those things that whether or not you're going to notice it subjectively, I would rather have it than not have it, especially since most of our video goes through different types of video processing anyway, whether it's scaling or, a multitude of other things, because any kind of processing that you add always takes away. There is never any free lunch. So the more resolution you start with at any time, it's always better.
Right.
Um, but the thing that did pique my interest when they talked about this was the fact that they're talking about a much higher bit rate. And
Right.
then because that means that your compression is now lower. And obviously, because they're not limited to file sizes, that can become a really big deal. So at the meeting that we had, I talked to them about that. And one of the things that they mentioned was that for this 4K cinematic titles, they're not using a variable bit rate, they're using a max bit rate. So what they're saying is, if this is our peak bit rate, and I don't know what that number is,
Mhm.
let's just say it's 200, or whatever, they're doing every frame at that. They're not sitting there saying this frame needs more what's used more. This frame doesn't need as much. Now, the downside of that is that obviously that's not a good thing when you're trying to keep the file size to a certain size. You're essentially could be wasting bits that you don't need on frames that yeah, give them. But it is basically just saying, hey, we just want maximum quality no matter what. So
Right.
now what that does is like, again, unless you're so okay, so the benefits of that. So um this is the when you're talking about everybody keeps asking me, is the 4K cinematic format going to be better than what I was seeing before with their normal 4K? So, okay, well, let's just look at the two things they improved. I've already said that the chroma resolution is unlikely to be noticed subjectively. There's really like almost impossible for you to test that,
Yeah.
in you know what I mean? Because like, how do you isolate it down to just that? Because you've changed other variables and stuff like that. But knowing
There
what we know about chroma science, it seems very unlikely.
is that even to detect that, or do you think that is that something that manifests in different, like people hear differently, people see differently to some extent as well? Do you think some people are capable of
No,
seeing that?
because your chroma gamut, the gamut itself is not changing. It's still 2020 color. You know what I mean? Like most of the properties that you would like, the luminance level is not changing, the gamut's not changing. It's just how much information there is in the chroma. And again, you're only comparing it native to upscaled. So it's not like you went from 420 and you were seeing 420 to 444 or 422. You're just seeing scaled versus unscaled with something we're not that sensitive to and
Okay.
stuff. So again, I think you would definitely see it if this was like test patterns or something like that. But moving video, it's just one of those things. Like, is it great that they have it? Sure, but that. Now the bit rate side of things, let's look at that now. Okay, so if you for one, you and I have both been watching Kaleidoscape for a long time, and it's very rare that I'm pretty sensitive to artifacts because I've been doing, reviews and testing for over 2 decades and stuff like that. And a lot of this was stuff that I used to look for all the time. I don't really see compression artifacts very often with Kaleidoscape, at least in my setup and stuff like that. So I was sitting there like, I mean, having more bit rate's always a good thing, but like how much of that would you subjectively see? But so I would look at it this way. Compression is usually an issue when you start getting into things that have a ton of fine detail and a lot of motion because it's just a lot to have to compress, when like if you had like a bunch of small objects moving all around and with a moving background and things like that. That's just how compression works. That's a lot more difficult than like compressing you right now in this frame where your head's moving every once in a while, but everything around you is static, right?
Mhm.
So if you had a situation where what they were doing before, you're encoding a video and here's your ceiling of your bit rate, and they were like, okay, yeah, we need this, oh, we need this, we need this, oh, we need this, we need this, and then you had scenes where it was hitting that cap.
Mm.
And if it was hitting that cap and it was like, man, we could have done a bit better if that cap had moved, that's
Sure.
where I would expect to see that
Okay.
that increase. So if you had like a lot of stuff. So now you're giving it, again, I don't know how much, what percentage more they're doing or whatever. I don't have those numbers. But if they're increasing that, you're really only going to see the benefit of that on title. So like if, there's a new, you took three movies and you said, okay, I have three of this, the old format and three in the cinematic. It's not like every frame is now just magically going to look better.
Mhm.
It's only really going to help the frames in those movies that were hitting that ceiling, if any of them were.
Gotcha.
Now, subjectively, most of the time, what we see and consider to be good video versus bad video, rarely, at least now, I mean, with streaming, it would probably be more of a thing. But when you're talking about disc or Kaleidoscape, more has to do with like the quality of the elements, how they shot the film, subjective choices that they made. Like, I want this film to look like X. So, a great example of a movie that's in the 4K cinematic format is like Ex Machina. Fantastic movie. But I mean, they shot it with low budget digital cameras. They gave it a real soft focus to give it a dreamlike quality or something like that. Doing all these things isn't going to magically take a movie that was shot to look a certain way and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's like they took the veil off or whatever. The veil was there on purpose. If you have a movie that was shot with like a really tons of film grain or something like that, it's not going to magically erase that because that's the intent. But a movie that has a lot of film grain in it, that's a lot of noise in the image that's getting compressed. So the odds of you seeing noise that's not the film grain now goes down dramatically. And I saw that, like a great example of that was I was looking at Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, older movie and stuff like that, but
Mhm.
pretty grainy. And if I compare the non-cinematic to the cinematic with some of the scenes where it's like you were seeing a lot of static noise and stuff, or a lot of noise from the film grain around like their face and stuff like that, if I went back and forth between them, you would see what the cinematic version had the grain, but it didn't have what looked like extra noise around it, where the other one would. You'd start seeing, what looked like extraneous noise. It was
Yeah,
different and stuff like that. Now, again, like that's only if you're looking for these things. I was looking specifically for that. But other cases where, like, immediately I started thinking about, like, well, what's movies that I've seen problems with? So,
Mm.
one of my favorite movies of the last, of a while is Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner 2049, I've actually worked with Kaleidoscape in the past on because I was seeing issues with, different problems in that video and stuff. And they've updated it a couple times in the past. But
Mhm.
one of the problems you see on disc and on Kaleidoscape was there are scenes in there where there's like smoke and fog where there was clearly some like banding, compression issues. Well, I would assume would be compression or whatever. I didn't know. But
Mhm.
it's on the disc and there, so I figure it was always in the master. So when that came out, that was one of the first titles I looked at. And when I tested it, all of those scenes that had those problems, they're gone.
Yeah.
So obviously there was a benefit there, and I would assume that would be that it now has enough bit rate where it just doesn't have any issues with that fog and stuff like that. So those are the things. It's basically just knowing that, at least in terms of Kaleidoscape, because they're doing, a constant max bit rate, and they're going back and they are, they said that they're trying their best to get the newest master that they possibly, the newest mezzanine file. So like some of these titles, they might not have had a new update for in a long time or things like that. They're trying to get that and now maximate. You're basically getting where it can't be any better than this,
Yeah.
outside of the limitations of either they're doing something wrong or there's something wrong with the master itself. Now, whether or not you want to devote the space that's required for these files and stuff, because they are on average, I'd say about 50% bigger than they were before. So, space is obviously what you pay for with Kaleidoscape. you know, Even when I pitched this 2 years ago to them, I said, hey, that means you're probably going to have a lot bigger file sizes than you were before. But I also look at that as, you don't need to have every title to be the best, but you might want to have the titles that you absolutely love to be the best. You'd be like, oh, I'm willing to give up storage, so I can have the best version of that movie that I absolutely love. Maybe not every movie that you have, because yeah, whatever. That's up to you. And from the Kaleidoscape standpoint, I was like, oh, so you guys sell more Terras if somebody wants to have them on there. It works both ways, right? There's always a two-way street, right? Um, so yeah, that's what I think about it. I'm really glad about it. Unfortunately, the player did, launch with some bugs. It uses the same processing chip line as the V and the E have. And the V and the E had some issues with their Dolby to HDR10 conversion. They launched a software update right around the same time that Kaleidoscape K came out that was supposed to fix that. And it did fix the issue that they had with raised blacks. Again, this is only if you were using the player to convert Dolby Vision to HDR10 for playback on a non Dolby Vision display. But when they did that, it created a new problem where it's artificially raising the brightness of objects in the image. Um, if you had a flat panel and you were using this process, it would be pretty noticeable. If you were just playing Dolby Vision and not doing the conversion, you wouldn't have any problem. The other issue that they did is the HDR10 metadata, and this applies to cinematic titles and the titles that they've had that are non-cinematic. The HDR10 metadata is completely screwed up. So if you have a display that uses that HDR10 metadata for any type of processing or anything like that, it could result in where it's not showing you what it's supposed to be showing. Um, they're aware of these and some other little quirky stuff that we found, and they're working on a patch for it. And I'm hoping to see that here soon.
Yeah, that point
Um,
release was due. I was just looking at mine because I was wondering. I 26.1 from June 29th. That's I remember
that's that's the one that they released at the same time as the player.
right.
They're
So 20.
supposed to be released. They haven't released the patch that's supposed to fix these issues that are specific. And again, this patch would apply to the K, the V, and the E because they all have the same problems. Um,
I feel like a week or so ago, I remember it was Mike Cobb or somebody had posted on the owners forum that the point release was starting its process. I think. Um,
Yeah, I'm not sure. When I spoke to them 2 weeks ago, they said that they were hoping to have this patch went out within 2 to 3 weeks, but I
yep.
haven't seen anything more on whether or not they've actually started rolling it out or anything like that. Um, so yeah, that was like a little bit of a quirk with it and stuff like that, and and then obviously they started when they rolled this out. The original intent was they were going to do 4K SDR and 4K cinematic Dolby Vision as the primary formats for
Mhm.
this. And then they realized that they could do a lot of so Dolby Vision in Kaleidoscape is limited to 422, but they have a lot of 444 masters. So they were like, okay, well, we'll release things in HDR10 as long as there's a 444 master. If there's a 422, they don't see the point in releasing that. You could just use the Dolby Vision version and have it converted. I personally would rather see them release everything in all the formats. That way I don't have to worry about any kind of a conversion format happening because, what if there's another quirk and now you're waiting, for that fix? And then what if there's another one? I'd just rather have a file that I know is what it's supposed to be and stuff like that. But obviously I'm not in charge of all of that. So, but they have been, steadily releasing, and I mean a lot. Yeah, they've been doing a great job
Yep.
of steadily outputting. Most of the new stuff that's been coming out has had all three formats, and a lot of the stuff that originally came out when it first are getting updates where they're adding the HDR10 version, so that you have all three. They haven't gone back and got all of them yet, but they've been. I mean, even today they did 15 titles came out today with
Oh wow.
updates.
I usually check it
So
every. I didn't refresh today, but I feel like I've been downloading a movie or two every day
yeah,
or
and
couple.
today was 15. Well, there's two new titles that hadn't been released before that are catalog titles. And then there's 13 where they're just an update where they added the HDR10 version into it.
Yeah.
So they're doing a pretty good job of like catching up and then adding new titles almost daily during the week,
Yep. Yep.
which has been great to see. So that, I think they're well over 300 titles now in cinematic format.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun.
So yeah, it's been great. A great rollout. I'm glad to see it. Again, like this gives them a way to say that yes, we are delivering something that you can't get. Sure, it's expensive and everything like that, but I mean, again,
Goes
if you
every other
want it,
day.
that's where you get it. I mean, any kind of fringe, high quality. Look at go back to SACD, DVD audio. You know what I mean. The list goes on of anything that would be kind of more of a fringe thing like this.
Mhm.
You're going to pay for it, but if you want it, this is the option that you have at the moment. So
Yeah. We had a couple comments. So John is here, actually, John Green. So I was looking on the web forums. They posted last Tuesday. So 26.1.1 started rolling out last Tuesday.
oh, okay, we'll have to
And,
look and see online if that's done at 26.1.1. So now I'll know which one to look for. So
yep.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks on that.
I just checked my system. It's not updated to it yet. But there's like five feature bullets. The two though pertinent to this conversation are these ones here. HDR10 content now plays with correct metadata, and the Dolby Vision content output as HDR10 preserves the dynamic range more faithfully. So that is
Fantastic.
underway.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can.
I feel like I've been downloading. I've been
Oh,
choosing to download.
so no, mine was upgraded this morning at
Okay.
5:43 a.m.
All right. Well, you got something to do tonight.
So yeah, I guess I'll take a look at that and give them some feedback on it. So
Nice. Yeah,
okay.
I've been choosing to download the Dolby Vision format because the 4K cinematic Dolby Vision format and still rely on the DV to HDR10 in Strato conversion because of choosing that one largely because I'm serving. I have two players. I have one server. I don't want to download multiple formats. I think to me that's like the cardinal
Totally get
cardinal
it.
rule not to violate in the ecosystem. Right, storage is at a premium. You don't download the same movie multiple times and burn up. I want more movies, not fewer movies multiple times. Um, but the TV upstairs is native Dolby Vision, but also that TV, as I understand it, a TCL needs to go into PC mode or game mode to be able to take native 444. I don't want to do that for that television. If the Strato can output the Dolby Vision format as HDR10 for the theater, and I can get the native Dolby Vision for the living room, I felt like that was a fine compromise for me. The few movies that we have watched in here, watching the DV version, like I don't feel I've noticed anything. I don't know if maybe the Mad VR was taking care of any of the of that bug.
So it won't take care of it. So the interesting thing about it is like it's just taking things that are brighter and expanding them to even brighter. So on
Okay.
a projector, because you're limited to how much niche you have in the first place, the Mad VR is now tone mapping that down. So again, it won't be something that jumps out at you like it would if you were watching on a flat panel, where now, stuff that would be shown accurately at like, say, 500 nits is now 1500 nits or 3000 nits, where it'd be like, whoa, big jump there because you're seeing how much of that range is different.
Mhm.
But what does happen is, because that those highlights are now a lot brighter, the Mad VR has to compress that more. So
Okay.
the image will actually look more contrasty because there's a bigger difference between the bright and the dark thing. So it's compressing it down more. So it is going to, like, once you get this fix, if you had a way to have like one player that didn't have the fix and one that did, and then you ran them through, you'd probably start seeing differences because the tone map is going to be different.
Okay. Okay.
So so that's why a lot of people early on were like, "Oh, the colors look different and stuff." Well, they would be, because the luminance levels are going to be different because of the way the tone map is going to operate on that. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison looking at, what you had before versus this, because the levels are all screwed up. So then the tone map is doing something different from this to this. So what you're seeing probably has more to do with the tone map than the actual difference between the two, kind of thing like that.
Gotcha.
So that, again, there's different scenarios for all these different playback, things and stuff like that. Hopefully the patch just makes this where it's just a
Yeah.
non-issue.
Yeah.
Now, you had also talked about, like, with your TCL, it's like, well, I have to put it in game or graphics mode to really benefit from 444. So that's another one that, like, I just tell people, like, not to worry about that, because
Okay.
if you think about chroma resolution, okay, let's just, without even 4K cinematic, let's say that I'm user A, and I have a home theater system, and I have a Apple TV or a Kaleidoscape or a Blu-ray player, and then that goes to my AVR or my surround processor. So let's say I have, like, oh, I've got this Marantz and I really like it, and then I go to this, TV or projector, right? So you got this playback chain, right?
Mhm.
So originally what we had was, we had 420 video being played that was then being converted to either 422 or 444. Now you could either select what that was, or you would just tell it to read your EDID on what the chain says it could do, and then it would just select based on that. So it didn't really, we never even thought about, well, should I output 422 or 444? Because it just didn't matter. And then it went to your Marantz, right? So
Yep.
let's say that it said, oh, your display says it can do 444. I'm going to output 444. Then it went to your Marantz. Well, in your Marantz, you were like, man, I really like it that when I press the volume button, the little OSD comes up and tells me what my volume is and stuff. Well, that means that the Marantz is now creating this on-screen graphic that it's overlaying on the video. And guess what? To do that, it color space converts
Mhm.
to whatever format that it has to use to be able to create that graphic. So you probably had a color space conversion that was going on there just so you could get that little volume display to come up, because
Mhm.
they're rendering it in a specific thing, whether it's RGB, 422, 444, whatever. Then it gets passed on to your projector or your display. Well, your display has a ton of internal video processing, whether that's tone mapping, scaling, sharpening. The list goes on and on. Well, almost every display has some kind of processor, and that processor does that process in a certain color resolution. And it's rare that it's 444 because if you're doing everything in 444, that's way more information. It's a lot more taxing. So a lot of times it's actually 422. And then from there, it goes to the panel drivers where it's all converted to RGB at the end, and then it goes. So we've already been in a system where color space color resolution has been changed, and nobody's given one crap about it unless, like I said before, it's doing something wrong.
Mm.
Now, there are some displays where if you feed it, like say 444 or 422, and it doesn't want that, it's computing in another space. I've seen where that can create problems. Like I don't remember. I think a BenQ DLP projector like I don't know 4 or 5 years ago. I was reviewing it, and like I think I was feeding it 422, and like everything I was looking at had really heavy posterization banding in it, and I was like, "What is going on here?" And then I talked to the engineers there, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we don't like that input because of what we're doing on the processing side. So change the chroma resolution going into 444, or it might have been opposite. I don't remember which one it was." But when I did that, all of that banding went away. So they clearly had an issue where if they were getting this in, their conversion process was creating a problem. But if you fed it that, it wasn't, and stuff like that. So as far as your TCL or whatever, I would just look at it as look, you're always starting with more resolution, and that's always a good thing. What it's doing in your path after that, I don't think you have, again, we're not looking at test patterns, so I wouldn't worry too much about what it's doing after that, unless the display you're feeding has problems with that type of signal. So in your case, it's like whether or not it needs to be Dolby Vision or HDR10 probably doesn't matter. But you made a good point where it's like, hey, I have this in, a K player here and here. Maybe your TCL does a better job at HDR with Dolby Vision than it does with HDR10. That used to be more of a thing, I feel, than it is with the newer TVs, but you might find that it just does a better job at tone mapping, if it does any tone mapping at all. So then it would make more sense to have the Dolby Vision so that, like you said, you don't have to have two versions of the movie and things like that. So, because
Yeah,
that space is a premium.
yeah. Up until the K, personally, I hadn't been sweating Dolby Vision because I was just downloading HDR10 copies, but
Yeah,
with in regular 4K, but the cinematic, I've kind of switched. Let's run through some of these questions because I think we're kind of touching on these, but there's a lot of
sure.
interest popping up. So just ran regular on the channel and the lives. Will a video processor change how the Ks look? Maybe expand on this question even a little bit more to say kind of what's the relationship between a video processor and the K? Any special things to know? Um,
Not really, and we could kind of blanket this. The two main video processors out there, MadVR and Lumagen. So MadVR actually has a full 444 pipeline. So, if you were like, I have to have 444 all the way through, MadVR allows that. Lumagen will accept 444 in and actually output 444, but its internal pipeline stuff works in 422. So this is kind of like what I was talking about before, where you have different things that are going to do different stuff in there. Again, I look at it as, you're always getting more resolution in than you were before, even though we were upscaling because it's native resolution.
Mhm.
But it's not going to affect like, oh, now it's truncating to 422 or something. Like I guarantee you, if you had a full 444 pipeline versus a full 422 pipeline or whatever, like there's no way you're going to see this again if we're talking about moving video. It'd be completely different. We're talking about text, graphics, things like that, but that's not what we watch on Kaleidoscape and stuff like that. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. Now, what a video processor, obviously the benefits of that, expand to other areas, calibration, tone mapping, scaling, things like that. Obviously adding any kind of video processor will usually always improve the video of what you have, regardless of the display. It's just a matter of, how many of these things are you going to notice in normal usage case versus not having them, would just depend on a bunch of variables. That's almost a completely different conversation. But I would not worry about like, okay, I have this now, but this now has 444. Should I now change out everything else in my system because I want to preserve that? Like, yeah, I think that's being way overthought.
Got it. Joe's asking as well about JVC projectors. So how
No.
does yeah,
They
JVC
don't. I tested this I have an NZ900 in my system. I tested it. Yes, they can bring 444 in. But if you do it with, again, like I was using, specific test patterns that are designed to find out if you can preserve full resolution, you can get close to it. I think they're probably at quarter to maybe half resolution on that. But even then, you have to turn off certain things in it. So, like, you can't use E shift. You have to have it in low latency mode, which means you can't use like any of the laser dimming on the newer models. So you are, so again, like sometimes if you want to have your path end to end something, your display might be able to do it like you said with your TCL. Well, I can do it if I'm in graphics mode, but that might turn off a whole bunch of functionality and stuff like that. And the thing is subjectively, you're probably going to notice the lack of those things more than the increase in the chroma.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? It's like you're giving up other features to get something that you're really not going to be able to tell in the first place. So, again, like people kind of just hyper focused on this in the beginning, like, oh, now I need to do all of this and this and this. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting there going, like, calm down.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is a good question too. Have you guys compared non-cinematic content on the K and the CV? Does it resolve better on the K? This has been a big point of discussion, I think, lately, because youth man Michael Stevens put up a video a couple weeks ago, I think it is now, where he got some guys together and they were comparing the K, and out of that video and out of that dialogue was the people noting that they felt that the regular 4K stuff looked better, to some extent better on the K than on the C. I have not done any comparisons between players. I pulled my E's and put my K's in, so I never did like an E to K, and I haven't had C's for a while.
Yeah, and they're
So
talking about with even non-cinematic content. I would think that they would be the same. I mean, I can't attest to it. I haven't done a side by side. The other thing you have to be really careful about with that is that if you had, let's say I had a K and a C, and let's say I had a C in my system for a while, and then I just added a K in, you know, I don't know what happened at that event. I have no idea about like, what went on or anything, but I've been in enough things to know that like somebody put something, like I had a guy that bought a cave from me and he was just like, "Hey, I'm noticing this and this and this." And it's because he plugged it in, but he didn't change any of the settings. So now, like the Kaleidoscape ship where they're outputting in constant so that you don't get changes. So it was frame converting to 60p. You know what I mean? Like things like that. So
right,
it, unless you knew for absolute certain that all the variables have now been matched.
yeah,
So it could, again, I don't know if that's the case in that, but I always look at stuff like that and like, well, there's always the chance that this was set up this way and this was set up this way,
sure,
or
yeah,
something like that. I mean, there could be small differences. The C and the K definitely use different chipsets.
right, yeah,
So, but I would be surprised if there was any difference with non-cinematic stuff, unless that there really wasn't any issues that I'm aware of with the C player in any regard when it came back to normal 4K playback. There were definitely problems with the E and the V because of stuff related to the chipset that they've
working
been
on
slowly and surely trying to fix and stuff like that. But
it.
yeah, so
Yeah, and I kind of feel the same. Like I had Mike Cobb on the show a few weeks ago, and I this wasn't a question that I even thought to ask because I wouldn't have expected there to be a difference. But I feel like there had been some reference to like you said, it's a different chipset, it's a different HDMI implementation. I don't know if there's if there could be something manifesting there, but I was surprised. I was surprised by any notation that that the K looked different or better in regular content.
well, sometimes there's also the thing that it looks different, therefore it must be better because it looks different. Different
Yeah.
equals better. So there's always that. But again, this chipset inherently has had issues where like they have like this AI, sharpening processing that, you could turn off in the menu, but then they
Mhm.
found that even though you turned it off, it was still doing some things and stuff like that. There's a bunch of discussion about that in the Kaleidoscape user forums and stuff like that. And a lot of that I was looking at going like, I am not seeing these issues. And then we found out like, yeah, because it was player related, not content related and things like that. So again, like, without knowing that every single little instance of any issue has been resolved. And, and we already know that there's issues because, like you said, they just started rolling this patch out. You're still looking at something that we know has some compromises and we don't know how much that affects other things to something that didn't have compromises. So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Eddie's asking, so going back to what you were saying before, and I think we touched on the answer to this a little bit, but should processing be bypassed for better performance, or like should anybody strive to keep a chain as clean as possible?
I mean, the law in video is you always want to try to keep things as pure as possible, but we're also talking about things where, like, unless it's doing something wrong, the likelihood that there's a problem is low. I mean, you could always sit there and take, feed through some patterns or feed through some content and, turn on and off the ability for it to do its overlay and then add the overlay in there and see if you even notice anything. Because again, like, this was the problem when used to be a reviewer, is that, there's a lot of things, like, there is no perfect system. So there's a lot of things that you could just sit there and nitpick and say, like, this isn't perfect, this isn't perfect. But it's like anything else. It's like it doesn't matter if it's perfect, because even without it being perfect, you never see this. You might see it in a test pattern because those are designed to show that. But watch unless you're sitting around with your boys watching test patterns on the weekend, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't relate specifically to what you're actually watching and stuff. So, you know, part of the nuance of being a reviewer is that you have to know, like, what is actually visible versus not, or else you can create a panic over stuff that's like, yeah, like, if I hyper, do pixel peep this up with a test pattern that represents like nothing you're watching, there's an issue here. But, like, who cares? You know what I mean? So it's like, harmonic distortion in a speaker, like, there's always going to be some, but at what point is there a threshold where it doesn't matter anymore? You know what I mean? Like, we have a system, of hearing and seeing that is not, flawless already. So yeah.
Terry Walsh question. So he has a Strato S and a Terra. Should I consider the new content version with a flat panel Samsung? Maybe going to a broader question are there certain equipment setups that you're recommending a Strato K for more than others, or some that you're recommending a Strato K
I
for
mean, a
less?
Strato K would improve, would theoretically,
Yeah.
you know, again, like, a Strato S is going to be able to deliver 4K video the same as any other player will from the standard 4K format that Kaleidoscape has. That's obviously been, great for a long time.
Mhm.
If you want to have the peace of mind that you are getting the absolute best video that Kaleidoscape can offer, you're only going to get that from a K. How much subjective difference you're going to notice will be on a case by case basis and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, there is no way to quantitatively say that you're going from, like, B plus video to A plus video, or whatever, because again, having all of these extras really only matters if the content benefited from it. Like, if the bit rate allowed something that was hitting a wall to now go past that wall to allow it. So stuff that already had issues with it and stuff like that. So it's that peace of mind of knowing that what you're getting, it's like I said, like, how many people went out and bought new receivers and processors when it went from lossy to lossless, because they're like, I have to have lossless. Now, if you did a blind A/B comparison between soundtracks with nothing else changed but that, between, like, Dolby True HD and Dolby at 640 kilobytes per second with lossy or whatever, you know, if you did a true blind study of that, would you be able to, really? But, people had to have it, and stuff like that. So I look at this as, like, if you want to know that you're getting a certain level of quality, or the likelihood of you having issues goes down,
Mm.
you're basically paying to hopefully have less issues than you would have if you did. But again, you and I both know with Kaleidoscape, I've had it for years now. It's rare that I see a problem. And
Mhm.
if I do see a problem, they typically find out that it's in the master more than it is in the process.
Yeah.
Other than the issues that were hardware related with the players that they've been working on and stuff like that. But again, like, that's something that's hardware related, not, file related, stuff like that.
Yeah. So Law's asking, what's your setup? What's your personal theater setup?
I have a really primo Zenith TV that I got in 1982. It's like a 24-inch. It's got the better dial. No, I have, in my system in my theater, I'm running a JVC NZ900. with a Lumagen video processor on the front end of it, Kaleidoscape Strato K in there right now. My screen is a 135-inch scope screen. It's a Stewart Studio Tech 130. Um, that's what it is for video. I assume that they want to know what the video side of the chain is, and then I'm using a Panamorph DCR lens with that as well.
And he's saying, so I've noticed reduced compression artifacts and banding in certain titles, which results in a perceptible cleaner image. It's an incremental improvement, but it becomes hard to go back to the non-C, non-cinematic. And I think that's congruent with a lot of what I've seen as well. I can definitely say nobody's come asking to return their Strato K because they were disappointed.
Yeah,
And
I've talked to that article that that you asked me about earlier. That it had comments from me and Sammy Prescott. Sammy's a friend of mine. He's a fellow calibrator, and he was skeptical about this when he first got it. And after spending time and he was looking at titles and going back and forth, kind of like I was. Yeah, the thing that I tend to key in on the most, and again, like at some point, I'm trying to figure out a way. I have two identical OLEDs in my garage that haven't been unboxed yet. That I was like, well, I could set those up side by side and then feed one and the other. Then you'd have like a true AB. But I wanted to wait till that patch was released so that I knew like at least the issues that they know of are already resolved. Um, but in my going back and forth between the two, not side by side, yeah, the clarity, like just the image seems cleaner and sharper. And it's funny is on I even mentioned it, I think in the art when I was talking to John and he did that article, like on some titles, I was like, again, like I was thinking about how compression looks. So I wanted to look at titles that I knew had issues or I would think, make compression harder. So high film grain, banding issues, things like that. But then I looked at some titles where I was surprised that I was seeing the, improvements. So Moana is a great one. Like there was a noticeable difference with that title to me in its clarity and sharpness. Again, like I didn't do a side by side, but and he was the same way. He was like, yeah, that's what I key in on, is that everything seems to be cleaner and a little sharper in that respect. So it's like, well, how much inherent little bits of noise or whatever was in there from the compression for, I don't know. That's just what I'm seeing.
Mhm.
And stuff, I'm not seeing it on every single title that I've done, but like I've been seeing it fairly often, more often than I thought I would see it on,
Nice.
and stuff like that, and on titles where I would have thought that, like, oh yeah, I just really don't think there would be a lot of benefit for this like clean animation and things like that. So
Right. Yeah, I've hit a point. People keep asking me too. It's like make a video kind of comparing the difference. Like, I don't know that I can. By the time I bring something up and I film it or I take a picture and then I put it through my editing process in a compression pass and then I upload it to YouTube and then you're watching it at maybe 720p. Like nothing's going to translate like all the way through that chain. But for me, like I was excited, just about the fact of, like you said, having a new format, objectively higher ceiling, and I'm at the point where it's like I don't feel a need to compare titles anymore. Like I'm just gonna, if it's in cinematic, I'm gonna download the cinematic, and if I'm watching it, that's the one that I'm gonna watch. And
I've gotten to that pretty much most of the time. There's definitely some titles that come up where I'm like, I have that title, but I don't see myself watching that title again anytime soon. Where I'll just be like, to not hog up the space, I'll just hold off on that. If it's a title that I know I use a lot for testing or demos, or it's just a title that we like to watch fairly often, it's a no brainer for me.
yeah,
But some of the other ones, I'm just like, I watched that movie a year and a half ago. It was fine, but I don't see myself watching it randomly. And if I do, I can always download it then and
mhm,
stuff like that, just to not hog up the amount of room that I have on my Terra. So
yeah. The other thing, going back to the comment I was thinking from the last one, is there's just so much conjecture or like people wanting like to get a quantifiable,
yeah,
like how
that's
what
I
is the
don't know how to
quantifiable
do
difference?
that.
You just can't you just can't because
I
it
mean,
goes.
Kaleidoscape could technically do that. I mean, obviously, I think on the Kaleidoscape forum, I asked the guy that's on there, hey, can you release like, weekly or monthly a list of all the titles that were updated, with full 444? Because everybody was so focused on the 444 thing, where I was like, okay, well, just post a list like all of these titles were updated to full 444 so that they would know definitively that they are 444.
Yeah.
But they could do something where, they're like, hey, today we released, I'm looking at the thing here, Super Mario Galaxy movie, in 4K cinematic, they added the HDR10 version to that. They could, say like, hey, the previous 4K version's average bit rate or whatever was this. We already know the file size difference, but now, the bit rate is this. So the percentage of increase in bit rate for that title is X. I mean, that would give you something at least quantifiable if
Yeah.
people just like numbers, because numbers seem to be a thing and stuff like that. But like again, what that does subjectively to the movie, I don't really know. You know what I mean? Like again, if you have a higher bit rate, you should be using less compression. So that's, usually always a good thing. But again, compression is usually only an issue if you see compression. So I don't know.
Comment from Greg. So going back to something that we were talking about earlier, Kris nailed it. The production of the content rules. How often will
Yeah.
content benefit from increased bitrate max with so much stuff targeted towards streaming? I don't think targeting towards streaming doesn't matter because
Nothing is targeted to streaming. The
yeah,
mezzanine file that's provided to streaming services and Kaleidoscape is, what it is. It's not a targeted because it's a huge file size. I mean, that's why Kaleidoscape has to compress it. Now, how much, iTunes or Fandango or Movies Anywhere or whatever wants to compress that down for their service for whatever they deem to be good enough quality, is up to them. But that isn't at the file, the master file end. That's at the, services end and stuff like that. So there is nothing that's truncating these movies specifically for streaming other than the streaming service that's delivering them.
the process they put it through to put it out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any lingering issues with the C? The
No.
C stable, yeah, for a long time.
Yeah.
Joe, some of us have Strato Ks in multiple rooms, so similar to me, where only one supports DV. So if what would you download if you had that set up? Kind of similar to what I was describing earlier. Would you go with the DV or would you go with the HDR10?
Well, all things being equal, if the Kaleidoscape with this new patch has zero issues converting Dolby Vision to HDR10, so that there's the caveat.
Yeah. Yep.
I honestly don't know if it would matter. So the HDR10's benefit at that point would be that it's full 444.
Mhm.
The Dolby Vision is 422. But the Dolby Vision is an ITP, which means that it's tunneled, which means that it's theoretically has a little bit more bit depth, not bit rate,
Yep.
than the HDR10, which is 10 bit. I know it's not full 12 bit, so let's call it in the middle and say it's 11 bit. But again, like, I don't know if that matters. It's the same gamut, it's the same resolution, it's all things. And again, we're talking about something that I don't know if it would matter unless that bit depth is helping with, like again, like the whole point of fell and getting 12 bit was that so you don't get compression banding mainly in color. And
Mm.
again, like I'm not seeing that in any of the banding I was seeing before, at least so far, seems to be getting fixed by their new bitrate increase. So I would just say, like, whatever one makes it where you don't have to download two different types of files for one movie. I mean, or just trust your eyes, download both, switch between them a little bit. If you don't see a difference, then it probably doesn't matter. If you do see a difference, even if it's a placebo, then just go with the one that your placebo said was better.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, like it's win-win, at the end of
Right.
the day, if everything works right. So
Yep. Sorry if the dings were coming through there. So this is going back to some of the earlier discussion as well from John. All dealer systems should have upgraded. John is from Kaleidoscape, by the way.
yeah,
Folks.
that's awesome. Thanks for the information, John. I appreciate that.
So I think maybe I think if you turn them on and off, right, that makes them do the extra phone home. I'll have to try to think when the last time I turned mine on was. It was actually, I don't know, Saturday or Sunday. I filmed a video that's in editing about this topic that should come out, but I'll have to turn them on and off. If yours updated today, mine probably should have too. Let's see. Oh, just kind of some comments to go back to what Mike said. Yeah, Mike said for this is similar to what you commented as well. Because take advantage of more color depth. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Dolby Vision uses ITP, so it theoretically has a bit more bit depth. It's not more color gamut coverage, it's just slightly more bit depth and
Yeah.
stuff. So
So about Sony projectors, any
I'm not sure. I haven't tested one of the newer Sonys recently, so I'm not sure if they use. I would doubt. So again, like I always have to base things on my experience in testing. So Sony projectors in general, one of the things that I've complained about over the years, and I just worked on some Sonys here recently and saw the same problem again, is Sony's inherently have banding from their own internal processing that's always there. I see it immediately when I start testing one. And like I said, I saw it even when I was doing my trip down to the California area, including Mike Cobb's. Um, so I would venture to say it's unlikely that they do 444 because I'm already seeing issues, that could be. That's not to say that they aren't, but the likelihood seems low to me. Although that might be a bit depth issue, it might be where they can't do 10 or 12 bit internally, so they're truncating it, and that's what creates the banding. But they can do 444 because 444 could be 8, 10, or 12 bit.
hmm,
Um, but I mean, anytime I've done, tests and stuff, I've even shown it directly to Sony engineers and given them material to look at to try to fix it where, they have banding um, inherently, unfortunately, with their projectors. This doesn't apply to their TVs.
there's a comment from Srin. If we could add to the wish list more storage options, we're going to run out of space soon. Yeah, I think
So
there's
that was something I talked to Kaleidoscape when I was there because, over the last 2 years, I feel like you and I have talked about this before too, where it was like, I wonder what new Terra is going to release this month. Remember, it
mhm,
was like every month I felt like there was another Terra coming out, and I was like, oh my God.
yeah,
So I asked them because now we're down to they have the 8, the
two.
30, and the 120, and that's
Yep.
it. They have two eights, the prime and the non-prime, but I mean for sizes. So
Yes.
I asked them, I'm like, oh, like now there's these big gaps
Yep. Yep.
where they didn't have that before. So I asked, was that their roadmap going forward, or were they looking at filling in some of those gaps? And from what I was told at the meeting, no, this is the roadmap forward. They've found that like the cost of two eights ends up being roughly the same as what a 30 is, but you're
Mhm,
getting obviously more storage. You're just a little under, so 30 makes sense. And then it's like 330s end up being pretty close to like, you know what I mean? Like they were looking at like the way the math, and they were also obviously looking at their sales information of like, what do people actually buy?
mhm.
And this ended up being, for them, the thing that made the most sense. So right now, as it stands, their plan is 8, 30, 120
Yeah. Yeah. And the guidance is if you want more than 30, then you buy multiple 30s until you, like you said, until you get to the 120.
until
Personally,
economically it makes more sense to do a 120. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I've given the feedback myself as well. I do feel that there's room for something else in between, whether that's like an 80, just another 2U chassis.
Well, they
Because I
used to have the 72, like, but that would be nice in between the 30 and the thing. But,
agree.
again, like I didn't think about the cost of it. So like it's like, well, how much more is the 72 than buying two 30s would have been, or you know what I mean? Like you get into that kind of thing. But even 8 to 30 feels like a pretty big jump to me, where I liked having like the 12,
Mm,
or whatever, because eight's only so I don't know. We could sit there and debate this all day. At the end of the day, they're going to sell what they want to sell.
yep. And they're competing fiercely, I'm sure, to get a hold and maintain these drives
Absolutely.
in the current marketplace and whatnot. But yeah, I do hear a lot of feedback. Like some folks just want the 2U. They want the 2U chassis, but the 120 is just too far to go. There are some benefits to getting especially now the 2U chassis is the only prime because the compact's not a prime now. So
Yeah,
always
and I
trick.
think that has to do with all this chipset stuff that's going on. Because they even mentioned in that meeting that, the 8 terabyte SSD drive, used to be dramatically cheaper than it is now, but the cost of that drive for them has gone up, astronomically. because I remember when that first released, I talked to them and, I said, hey, you did this for this. Are you going to start? And they said, well, at that time, the price of SSDs was going down, down, down. So they were looking at it like, eventually we'd probably like to have it where everything's an SSD. And when the price starts to get where that is something that, makes sense for us. But unfortunately, it did this, so
Yep.
I don't see that happening anytime in the near future.
Yeah, I agree. I think without the whole data center craziness, we'd probably be looking at a different Terra lineup right now, and a different direction for the line. Like I said, a lot more SSD investment, but it's wild. I think I saw the other day something like Western Digital? Like Western Digital's production for some amount of time, like the next 12 to 18 months, is like it's spoken for, essentially. It's been bought. um it's crazy where store like kind of where storage is going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all right, wish list time. So what do you want next? From Kaleidoscape. What do you think? And
So
how do
I talked to them about that. Like I was like, hey, never in a million years would have thought you would be able to deliver what you're doing right now for cinematics. So let's roll the dice, right? So the thing that I said that again, looking at like what would be something that would benefit people, you know what I mean? Like I always look at like, I mean, obviously I'm always a little selfish and think about, well, what would benefit me? But
you
usually that still helps everybody else. But
Mhm.
one of the things that I thought would be something that would be a really cool thing to have is I've always been a big proponent of the 4K SDR format that they have because it allows a lot of displays that don't have tone mapping or whatever to be able to still get native 4K and things like that. So like especially if you're running like older equipment and things like that that can only do the a certain amount. The downside of 4K SDR compared to 4K HDR when we're talking about projection systems like with flat panels, it's kind of just obviously you're gonna do HDR, but there is a benefit there for projectors, but the only caveat there is that 4K SDR is in 709.
Mhm.
So you're only getting 709 color. Now, we can debate all day whether or not how much you would notice and how much the movie actually has colors that really exceed 709 because it's not as much as you probably think it does and stuff like that. But I said, if we could have a format that's 4K SDR with 2020 color,
Oh,
now,
cool.
that would be something that would be great. It would make it where if you have a projection system, you now no longer have to rely on tone mapping. So it doesn't matter how good your tone mapping is anymore because you already have it mapped. Now, there are caveats to that too, because if the content that's being provided was from a simple trim pass, like with the Dolby tools, you can do like automatic trim passes to different levels. And sometimes like you'll notice if you look at 4K SDR titles, some of them don't look that good where others look really good. And I wonder how much of that is like this one was actually specifically graded for 100 nits. This one was like an automated thing. I don't know. I'm
Yep.
figuring that's probably might have to do with it.
Mhm.
But if we had that, it would basically be where now we're getting the benefit of the color, the benefit of the resolution, and we don't have to rely on any type of tone mapping of what it's deciding to do with whatever. This would also actually be something that would be a good thing for flat panels too. And the reason I say that is that most people that are using flat panels, I mean, especially if you're talking about the general public, it's in a family room space or whatever. And, from the very beginning, HDR is an extremely poor format for general usage because the fact that it's in PQ means that everything is absolute, which means that a lot of people are like, why is this dark? I used to watch the same show when it wasn't in HDR and it wasn't dark.
Mhm.
And that's because of how, PQ works versus a relative gamma system. So if you had 4K SDR with 2020 color and you went into a flat panel, it would then allow you to use relative gammas. So now you could have a gamma that makes more sense for the room you're watching it in. So now you could again start watching things that are at 400, 500 nits that are only 100 nits, and it would look like the bulk of the information would look brighter, that so it would work in a normal viewing environment like a family room or something. Where HDR, you don't have that. They have like systems like Dolby IQ and all these other things that are just compressing to try to make it brighter. But really, at the end of the day, a relative gamma works so much better in a normal like viewing if you're not in a dark pit theater room or whatever. So that would give you the ability to have again 4K with wide color and a relative gamma system, which could benefit even people with flat panels more than they thought.
Interesting. Cool.
So that was something I asked for. Outside of that, there isn't a lot. I'd love for them to be able to deliver some of the older soundtracks that haven't been truncated. But again, like I don't see studios being like, "Oh yeah, we still have that sitting around here. We'll send you that."
Yeah, they can't.
Um, the other thing is like some of the older versions of movies that I find to be better, and I even gave them cases of it. Like recently, we had the big update to 4K of Aliens, by Cameron,
Mhm.
and that movie's like riddled with all of that AI sharpening and stuff, and I just think it looks like an abomination. But if I watch the HD version I have on disc, it looks fantastic, and the older HD version that was on Kaleidoscape looked like that. But then they updated those to the new HD version that's based on the new master and it has all the same problems. Well, that wasn't a problem when I had my C. I just kept my original download, but that's not compatible with the K because of the compatibility things that they did. So now I have no option to use that. So I'm like, well, I'll just watch it on disc, I guess.
Mhm.
Kill Bill was kind of the same way. The old HD versions to me look better than the new 4K version. I even just the other day they had the whole bloody affair on sale, so I bought it. And like I turned it on, it wasn't even 2 minutes in, and I was like, God, this looks so bad, and I deleted it again. So,
Mhm.
so unfortunately, I like where this is only a problem because of that compatibility issue because I could have kept the old version, but it would be great if you had a thing where you could, request an old version or something like that if they still had it stored where you bring that up. But again, like I mean, those are onesie twosie things because it's not something that happens a lot, but it can happen and obviously it did. So
Question here about well, but it's going towards 8K. Maybe we'll broaden this question because I don't want to put you on the spot for anything that you may know. CD is in a couple weeks, so
mhm.
broadening out. Is there anything that you're excited? Are you going to CD? Is there anything that you're excited to see there, or
I am
hoping?
going to Cedia. I can't say I'm real excited about anything. I haven't heard about anything that like I'm getting excited about. There's definitely stuff I want to see, just to see it, kind of stuff. But like, I haven't seen any press announcements where I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see that or anything like that.
Mhm.
I have heard, pretty reliably that JVC isn't going to have anything new at this show. I don't know if they're going to have like firmware updates for their existing lineup, but I've been told like not to really expect any new hardware.
Okay.
My stance on 8K in general, I think high resolution when you start talking about 8K or higher is fantastic when we are talking about capture. So if you're talking about like filming a movie,
Mhm.
so like you got Nolan with IMAX cameras, you've got like 8K cameras from Red and Ari and all this stuff like that. Like the more resolution at the capture side, the better, because again, like the free lunch thing comes in, like the more they do in post, the more they want to change like the framing or whatever, the more resolution you have to begin with, the better it's always going to be on the downstream. But
Mhm.
when we're talking about home, even somebody with a really big screen in their house, 4K is already more resolution than most people are capable of seeing from a normal viewing distance. So you already have headroom in a video system at home without 8K. So I'd rather have better pixels, not more of them. I would rather people focused on, dynamic range or lack of compression or, a multitude of other things other than the actual pixel density, because the density we have is already extremely high. Now,
Mhm.
Kaleidoscape, obviously, with the cinematic format, brought out 8K and they have the one video on there. And I
Yeah.
asked them about that, and they said, well, it's kind of the chicken egg thing. Like, we've shown that we have a delivery system for 8K, we have a title already in there.
Mhm.
We're hoping that that's a poke to studios saying, like, hey, here's a system. If
Right.
you want to start releasing something, we can do that. So,
Yep.
maybe at some point now, I've seen people say, well, there is no 8K content out there, and they're right, but they're not right, because there's plenty of movies that have been scanned, like film movies and stuff that have been scanned at 8K or even higher resolution. So there are masters out there, that are being, that are at that level that they could release. Now, yes, most movies nowadays are still being shot with 4K cameras or whatever, or yeah, and in post production might not even be full 4K or a 4K DI digital intermediate or anything like that. I realize there's a lot of stuff like that. So again, like I always say, like better pixels versus more pixels. But if they wanted to deliver content, if the studios wanted to, there is stuff that they could do.
Mhm.
But I think for a long time, like if marketing gets to the point where they want to do 8K, and I do feel like it would be more for the marketing than anything. Like let's say like this fall, Apple's like we have the Apple TV 8K. I would imagine that most of what you're going to be watching is something where like the player itself is converting 4K to 8K or scaling it, or the content you're seeing is scaled and then advertised as 8K. That's not to
Mhm.
say that there wouldn't be stuff that is native 8K, but I just feel like it's wasting a lot of storage and stuff for something we don't need. I'd rather them use that storage for other things.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I haven't committed to going yet. I really should. I was looking at it a little bit over this past weekend, so it's not too late. For me, the flights are pretty cheap actually, and the hotels and stuff are still available. So I probably should make the trip, but maybe extend a little bit. Um,
I'm going to be at the show for only a day. I'm going to be there the day before the show opens. I'm helping out with some people have asked me to come in and look at some stuff in their booths.
okay,
But I'm actually going to be on the show floor only for one day. I don't know if it's going to be Wednesday or Thursday yet. But
gotcha.
I'm going to be in the Colorado area in general because I'm going to be out there for a calibration tour. And
Perfect.
then my daughter lives out there, so I always like to have the excuse to go see her. So
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think I saw my wife turned 50 in the summer, and I turned 50 in a couple months. And so, like, well, what should we do for our 50th birthdays? I'm like, well, if we're going to Denver, there's some cool stuff that we could do in the area.
oh,
So
I
I
could
think,
think of many things to do other than Cedia as an anniversary or birthday thing.
yeah,
So
yeah, I was looking. I found this place called the Devil's Thumb Ranch. That looks
nice.
really, really cool place to go. So I'm like, oh, maybe we'll go. We'll go 4 days there and then do the show and come back. So we'll see.
Yeah, 20 years ago, Cedia was something that I was always really excited to go to. I mean, going to
Mm.
the shows back then was pretty amazing. Going to the shows now, if especially if you have, like you've been going to shows as long as me, it's nowhere near what it used to be, unfortunately. But it's still, it's always, great because you see people you don't see that often if you have friends in the industry and things like that, and yeah, it gives you a sneak peek at stuff that might be coming out or new stuff. So.
Cool. I don't know if you have a hard stop. We've actually gone over the hour. We
No,
can hit
no,
it
I'm
more
I'm okay.
and keep rolling. We got a good audience going on here. Mostly cloudy saying this is kind of an interesting question. Historically, in your home theater journey, where does 4K cinematic rank in terms of upgrade, like upgrade level? Is it as big as DVD to HD Blu-ray or HD Blu-ray to 4K Blu-ray, etc.? So
No,
probably behind those two, yeah.
yeah. I would say if it was so the jump from DVD to HD was pretty big, because 480p 480 is nowhere near. I mean, we can see way more resolution than that. HD to Blu-ray, HD wasn't quite enough resolution. Again for most seating distances and stuff. But the jump from HD to 4K, unless you had like very specific kind of situations, wasn't nearly as big as DVD was to HD. So I would say it's closer to the HD to Blu-ray, but not even quite to HD to 4K, but not quite as high as that. And again, like this, all of what they're doing really only matters if the title needed it. So, it's not something I'm just going to say like every movie is just going to be like, wow, or something like that. But again, like it definitely has been where, problems that I've seen in the past are now gone and there is an increase in clarity. But yeah, I, I don't expect anybody to be like slapped over the face when they turn this on and like, I can never watch anything. I'm so spoiled, kind of thing like that.
Yeah. All right, we settle it for Joe. Joe, he'll be sticking with Dolby Vision, then take the extra color bit depth over 444. Yeah, this is a decision that I've largely been making Joe and I, we've been talking about this offline as well quite a bit. For a 2-zone DV and non-DV setup, I think
Yeah.
pretty well. Super chat. Thanks so much, Bobby Digital. Kris, could you use an ISCO 133 anamorphic lens with an Epson? Pros or cons?
Yeah, you can use an ISCO 133. You could, yeah, you couldn't use a 1.25x with that. Pros and cons. Pros is you're going to get a little bit more light output and your pixel, yeah, a little more light output. The con is that depending on your throw distance and things, you're going to have some curvature to the image, which is why, like back in the day, because that's a horizontal expansion lens. So back in the day, that's why we used to use curved screens. So it'll depend on your throw distance. You might find that you need a curved screen. Um, so.
Anything new in lenses? I feel like I haven't. That's a market segment I haven't paid a ton of attention to.
No, I think Panamorph has done a few new alpha, based lenses, which is like a combination vertical compression and horizontal expansion lens where it tries to be the best of both. I mean, there's some really good, the ISCO lenses were really good lenses. I mean, if you look at a Panamorph, I mean, an ISCO lens. Oh, here, just a second.
He's got one. Show and tell. Show and tell time.
Yeah, so I don't know how familiar you are with like a Panamorph lens, but
Yeah, I have the DCR. I've been running the DCR on mine for quite
so
a
you
while.
know what it looks like and everything like that.
You can see the right behind my head
This
there.
is a 1.33x ISCO lens.
Hmm.
So, I mean, this thing weighs, I don't know, 5, 6 pounds, but I mean, like the quality of the glass, and I mean, you could just see how big this is. And then it also has an independent focus ring on it.
Hmm.
So, once you get it installed, you can actually focus the image down on it. This is the 133XL, so this is the big version of it. So I have one of those, like even looking through it, like I'm now looking at my computer monitor through it, and it's like it's crazy. Like the text actually looks sharper going through this than it does when I don't go through it, which makes
Oh
no
wow.
sense to me, but it is. So yeah, these are really good. Um, so yeah, anybody that's in the market for one, I have one that's literally brand new with the original ISCO case, and I have a what you'll never find. I actually have a brand new, never been used before 1.25x cinema lens up there that I got from. There was a project I was working on with somebody, and we bought a lens from a guy that imported it from another country, and there was all this damage to it. And I got hold of ISCO in Germany, and they put me in touch with the ISCO people down in LA, and
Hmm.
their lead lens tech. Um, I shipped the lens, and they were going to see if they could fix it, and they couldn't fix it. And then the lens tech came back and he's like, well, if you're interested in one of these, I actually have one it's been my ready spare that's just brand new in a case that I haven't been using. I'd be
Mhm.
willing to sell. So we brought that in, and then the project fell through. So I literally have one that's never been used, which is almost unheard of nowadays, that's sitting up there. And that makes this lens even look small. So yeah, anybody in the market for an ISCO, let me know.
Awesome. You can even read your books at night if you hold it up to your eye.
Oh,
Then.
yeah. Yeah. If you wanted to hold that lens up, that thing's a beast.
Oh, we started something here. So okay, is 4K cinematic better than the VHS to DVD transition or
All
Laserdisc?
right.
Got to rank them all. Gotta rank them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the question. Oh yeah, so this has actually come up a couple of times. Made an interesting point. Um, Eddie Mangamba, how about a cinematic-like solution for audio? But basically, can audio fidelity be increased any more than we already have?
So from a fidelity standpoint, when if we're talking about true fidelity, the cinematic versions, as far as I know, don't have more resolution. They're 24-bit, 48K, which is what we have at home. We already have lossless compression, so that's not a thing. Now, cinematic formats like Atmos, they have way more objects and everything like that, and that can't be delivered because the consumer actual playback decoders can't do anything more than what we have now. So we're already maxed out there. Really, the difference would just be, is there a difference between, did they do a near field mix for the home release versus the theatrical mix? But the thing there is that I could see certain circumstances where like that sounds great because the home mix was neutered, but the cinema one wasn't. But I could also see where a good non-neutered near field mix would sound better than a cinematic one because again,
Mm.
they're different types of spaces. So it's like just because one is one thing doesn't automatically equal better. You know what I mean? Like, um, would I prefer that every studio did a great, home cinema mix that didn't truncate this or whatever? Because we've already seen in the past that, like I have DVDs of movies that probably have a better soundtrack, subjectively than the new 4K version and stuff like that. But that's not a limit of the format. That's just a decision that was made at some point to do that. And like Kaleidoscape isn't going to allow for that anymore unless again like the studio they were like, hey, we've had requests that we want the old version of the soundtrack for movie X, can we get that mixed into one of your mezzanine files? I mean, sure, I'd love to see it, and obviously somebody from Kaleidoscape is watching this, so they can take that note, but whether or
Mm.
not we would ever see that, I really doubt it.
Yeah.
So but yeah, I'd love to have the best of everything.
100%. Yeah, yeah, I was agreeing. I was thinking about this question. Like, it's really more on the content providers to just make better mixes and
Yeah, and
put.
Kaleidoscape could obviously ask the question. I always look at everything as ask the question. The worst thing that they could say is no.
Sure.
But who knows? They may be like, oh yeah, yeah, if you want that asset, we can send it over. I've always kind of wished that, like with, because we've had those versions on Kaleidoscape at one point and then they were changed to another version,
Mm.
it'd be cool if they had the tools where if somebody said, hey, can you mux in and now we can select like that audio track with the newer one, you know what I mean? Like I don't know how that all works, but if they were like, oh well, the last release had a better soundtrack and people wish that that was on there, we can mux that
Mm.
in and then
Mm.
have that as a selectable soundtrack when you hit audio and stuff like that. That would be cool. But
Yeah.
again, I don't know like what they're allowed to because
Yeah.
the studio is probably telling them like you have to do this with this and you might not be able to do that. Because I even asked about like one of the things that annoys me, one of the few things that annoys me with Kaleidoscape is they randomly will keep updating cover art because the studio is now using a different cover art. So you
Yeah.
get like the Mission Impossible ones where they're all red with the black and it just looks awful, or the Transformers where it really looks like your chroma space is wrong or whatever. And I'm like, with Kaleidoscape, it's great. You can put your own custom cover arts in there. But I was like, hey, it'd be great if you went into the other section, where it says like play a version of a movie or whatever. When you're
Yeah.
in the Kaleidoscape menu, there's always that other thing at the bottom.
Yep.
If it had a thing that said cover art and you selected that, and every cover art that the studio has provided in the past is still there. So, like, if they just updated it to something you didn't like, but you liked the one they had before, it's
Go.
still there and you could say like use that cover art. And I asked them that and they said that they're not allowed to do that. Like the studios are very, like this is the cover art you're going to use for this, even though you can technically change it, which means like, yeah, but then why would they allow you to change it? So, again,
Yeah.
politics of stuff like that. But I was just like, well, it'd be nice to have it where like, hey, if it was there before, just leave it. I mean, that thumbnail probably takes up like no space at all. And then
Little
I
J.
could at least change it or whatever.
Yeah, almost like, yeah, there'd be like a per movie settings um, area or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like when cover art changes, it tends to change universally across all platforms. So
It
it's like
does. Yeah.
it's
So you'll see the same change on iTunes or Movies Anywhere or whatever
yeah,
and stuff. But again, at least they give you the ability that if you want to change the art, you can change it on your own. I just was looking at it like, well, if I just wanted to change it back to that, I wouldn't have to find it, upload it, and do things like that. It would just be an easier way to do it.
yeah.
But yeah.
Cool question here. M1A1 Abrams 87 for home calibration selection or home calibration software selection, flat panel projection, etc. Possible video processor down the road. What's a better option, Light Illusion or CalMan? Or maybe even broaden this into a general question, like what tools are you using for calibration today? And is anything new and interesting kind of come along in the tool space for for what you do?
Nothing really new has come around that I know of. I mean, both of those platforms are always updating and, like trying to get better at doing what they do. I actually have both softwares. I have Calman and Light Illusion. I generally, most of the time, use Calman. I don't have any problem with the results that I get, and I just find that their software is far more user friendly. Even though I've built out my own workflows and stuff like that. Not to say that I can't get the job done with Light Illusion, and Light Illusion has some stuff where like depending on the jobs you're doing, you don't have to do as much rework. I guess is how I would put it. But from a quality standpoint, especially with consumer video, in terms of like what the end result is, I'm not seeing anything where I'd be like, oh yeah, you definitely want to use them because you just always get better performance from that. I personally haven't run into that. And like I just find that Calman makes things where anybody that wanted to get into calibration or whatever, there's it's just far more intuitive to use, in my opinion. um Again, like, not to say that you can't figure out and get used to what Light Illusion does and use it and get great results. They both do great things, but yeah, I don't really have a preference for one or the other than just the usability, and I find Calman to be, to be more usable at that end. So, and I do a ton of flat panel projection and Mad VR calibration. So
Are there any AI based features coming into these tools that you've seen?
I haven't seen anything, and I'm actually kind of surprised on that. I think at some point we will start to see that. Um, so yeah, we'll see.
There was another interesting one too. This comes up a lot. Mars 7352. Would a Mad VR help improve an OLED panel? And maybe not even just Mad VR, Lumigen. Like, how do you feel about video processors on flat panels versus projection setups?
I generally find that they're not necessary. I've turned down a lot of sales on video processors from people that reached out to me on flat panels. Generally, if you're talking about, I guess it depends on what you'd want to achieve. If you're thinking about it from the standpoint of like, I want to improve my HDR performance, which I would imagine be reason why you would want a video processor. I don't generally think that that's going to happen. Most of these video processors are designed so that they're taking the HDR signal and converting it to an SDR signal, and then you're overlaying it onto a base, calibration. So on flat panels, most of the time, if you're feeding an input signal that's SDR, it's going to lower what its peak output can be. So now you're truncating the ability of that display. And then if you think about it from, if you're not truncating it and you're watching it on one of those ones, I mean, even a dim flat panel is like 800 nits, and even that's pretty low nowadays.
Mhm.
So the sheer amount of content that you're actually really tone mapping is pretty low, because like, like 800 to 2000 sounds like a big jump,
Mhm.
but light doesn't work like that. Light is logarithmic. So like the difference between 800 nits and 2000 nits is really not that much at all. Like you'd be surprised. Like it would probably be a little more pronounced side by side, but like outside of that, so the amount of tone mapping that you're really doing is pretty low. Now, if their tone map has some like big issues to it, then maybe you just get a different flat panel, which would probably still cost less than the video processor would.
Yeah.
Um, so you know what I mean? Like the best flat
Yep.
panels you can buy nowadays cost less than most video processors do. So,
Right.
or right around the same price.
Yep. Yeah, even at
Um, so yeah, like I'm sure the marketing for both brands would tell you like, no, man, we're gonna make it awesome. And like, yeah, so there might be some like benefits in scaling and maybe some calibration stuff, maybe. But if you look at how much it costs, I feel like juice isn't worth the squeeze thing. And
yeah.
again, this is somebody that sells them, so it like you know what I mean. Like I'd be more inclined to try to sell it to make money, but I be hard to do with a straight face. So.
Yeah, same. Same in both counts as I talk to folks with these questions. They're people coming to ask about Mad VR or whatever, it's like, well, how many things will this do for you? Like, what are the value of those things? And the
Exactly.
more boxes we can tick, then the more enticing it becomes. Interestingly, I'd say I have talked to what I would say is a surprising number of folks over some stretch of time that actually want to vertically stretch to get rid of black bars or at least some amount of black bars on flat panels. Like a lot of folks just don't like black bars and they want to
Yeah, but the thing
nail.
is when you start doing vertical, so like vertical NLS is what you would do. So you'd really have two options. You would either just zoom and crop the sides,
Mhm.
or you would do vertical NLS. But the problem with vertical NLS is that you're now non-linearly stretching vertically, which
Yeah.
like we already do this horizontally with some things, but with those like the way motion works, you don't really notice it as much unless it's like done poorly. But
Mhm.
with vertical, there's almost no way. So like if you have anything that scrolls vertically,
Interesting.
it gives it what I call a barrel effect, where it looks like you're rolling on a barrel. Like the video is literally going like that instead of like like a great way to demonstrate is like use the vertical and like you have Mad VR, so like do vertical NLS on something to get rid of the black bars on, and then watch like an Apple TV menu when you're scrolling, and it just looks very bizarre. But the same thing would happen with video. So I'm not a big fan of vertical NLS. I would probably, if I had to pick, I would probably just straight crop if I was going to do that. Just use a zoom crop methodology on that. But yeah, the reality is that, there's a reason those black bars are there.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, I don't want to go back to the pan and scan era or anything like that. So
Right. All right. Maybe we'll call this the last question. Manny Daddy, any recommendations for video settings in Kaleidoscape with the no letter? And again, maybe broaden this out. Do you have a couple of like most important setting recommendations for Kaleidoscape that
for a
you?
Kaleidoscape in general, well, here,
Yeah.
let's see here. So, if you have if you use the cover art wall, it's surprising how many clients I go to their houses to calibrate. And, they use like, they have a Kaleidoscape and a Terra. So they have like the cover art wall, the
Mhm.
textbook one. And they don't know that you can have it where it doesn't do the shuffle and instead does
Oh,
the alphabetical.
yep.
So
Yep.
that's in the settings that you can do from the player itself. So if you have a cover art wall and you don't like how the shuffle thing always looks cool for marketing, but like in a practical usage standpoint, it's like the worst thing ever because as soon as it shuffles, like, well,
Yeah.
where's this movie in relation to this
Yep.
movie now and stuff. So I can't stand it. But so you can turn that off in that, and then if you have a scope set up, if you're a projector user and you're using a scope screen like I am, you can go into that same menu under advanced and tell
Mhm.
it to always put the subtitles into the active image so you don't have to worry about subtitles being outside of the frame. So
Yep.
those are two. If you go into the IP menu, like the My Local thing on your computer, and then go to your player and click settings under the components. There's quite a few settings here that I generally recommend. On the main, right when you get to the screen, you'll see a thing that says select output behavior. These default to what's called minimize display mode changes, which means that they're going to make everything the same frame rate and the same dynamic range. Um, some people would rather have that so that their TV doesn't have that blanking period where it's syncing between like this resolution and this resolution, SDR versus HDR or whatever. So that like they get tired of seeing the where it blanks out and stuff. It depends on how fast your display can do that. So there's minimized display mode changes, which means that it's always just going to output everything at the same. And usually that means you're also going to be frame rate converting to 60p. So I generally don't like that. There's another one called allow display mode changes. And then it says, and I believe on that one, it will allow it to have different frame rates, but it'll still allow the Kaleidoscape to scale anything that's not 4K to 4K.
Mhm.
And then there's allow display mode changes, use external scaler. That's what I generally set it to the most in, especially if they have an external video processor,
Mhm.
because that means it's just outputting whatever the native is. So if it's 480 HD 4K, you're getting that resolution output, the frame rate it's supposed to be, and the dynamic range it's supposed to be. So you're going to get the most switching, like the syncing stuff. But you're going, if you're using something that does a really good job with video processing and stuff like that, that would be the one to use. Then they have obviously the OSD aspect ratio stuff, and that's just based on whatever one you're using. Outside of that, I found with I don't know if this applies to the V, because he asked about the V specifically. The C, I found that I always use the HDMI color format to 444. I found that if I used 422 output, it looked like there was a little bit of chroma delay. So I always did 444. If you're having HDMI issues, you can limit the HDMI output to 18 gigabits per second, because that's still more than enough for anything you're going to watch. And you might have less issues with HDMI. Honestly, you could even go down to 13.5 gigabits per second. That way you
Yeah.
don't have as much bandwidth. You're less likely to have HDMI issues, and you're still more than the max bit rate of 4K 24, which is what you're going to be watching, because that's only like 9 gigabits. So those can help with stability in a system if you need to. But from a standard picture quality standpoint, the
Yeah.
main one that's going to change anything is that output behavior kind of thing.
I thought I
So
had I thought I had seen too, for the K owners at least, the use external scaler is the one you want because that's the one that ensures you get the native. There's no chroma if it there's no chroma resampling or upsampling. I guess maybe for what would you, but just be from
yeah, I
422.
think in the K, if you set it to use external scaler, and then in the other menu, the advanced where it says color format, set it to automatic for both. That makes it where whatever you're watching, it will output the raw. So if you're watching Dolby Vision, or like one of the older ones, it'll output whatever the actual color resolution is. So you'll
Yep.
see if it's 444 or 422 if you have something that will tell you what the incoming signal is. I
Yep.
use a Lumigen, I can find that out. So I can see,
Right.
is the file coming in as 422? Is it coming in as 444? And stuff like that. So yeah, that will automatically switch based on whatever you're watching to what it actually is.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
that's with the K specifically. I don't know what it is with the V. I only had the V for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. The video that I filmed this past weekend, I'm hoping to publish it on Thursday. Um, I I kind of show this off. I go through a specific title in all four 4K formats, displaying the what is the media, what is the output, and just to get the baseline for like what should you expect um, out of the content and out of the player. And then I also talk about some of the things about how to make sure you're downloading. If you want a specific format, how do you get it, and how the system manages multiple formats and stuff like that. So anybody looking for some more detail, that video, hopefully my daughter does her job. That video will come out on Thursday.
Yeah,
I
that is definitely something that have to be managed. That was another thing in the meeting that I put a request in. If I go right now and I say I want to, like, it's funny. I have the Kaleidoscape thing on the side in case I had to reference it. And during the time of this video, they've released three more updates in cinematic. But
yeah,
if I go to any of these and I say I want to download, so like they just did Oblivion. So if I say download, it automatically defaults to what Kaleidoscape feels is the highest version. So in my case, it says home theater will download 4K cinematic Dolby Vision, but I generally download the HDR10 version for reasons we talked about before. So I have to click change, uncheck Dolby Vision, check HDR10. I know life's hard, but I
yep,
asked them it'd be nice if we had something where I could put into my account that my preferred version is 4K cinematic HDR10, and that way it would always default to what my preferred was, and if I wanted to change that for any reason, I still have the option to do that. I also would like to have it where they could do where you could say whether or not you prefer to have supplements or not, because that's always a separate download. So again, it'd be this thing that if I say I don't usually generally want supplements, do not download supplements, it'd be something where it automatically doesn't download them unless I tell it to go ahead and add them. and stuff like that. I always look at anything where there's a user interface of like whatever you can do to make it where the end user doesn't have to do as much work. That's the way to go.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like I'm sure Amazon's business increased exponentially when the click to buy thing became a thing. You know what I mean? The one click,
Hmm.
because you're not sitting there spending all the time doing all the things and stuff. So like, why not, do the same thing here? So that would be a nice one. So yeah, you could see like today alone, they've released 18 titles, starting with The Wolf of Wall Street. Everything above and to the left of that was released today.
Yeah.
So it was either a new title, or it was one that HDR10 and 444 was added. So I think, like Fargo and Blink Twice are brand new titles, and so is Reagan, and I believe The Grinch. Everything else was they added the HDR10 version to it they already had the Dolby Vision and the SDR version. Oh no, and Oblivion's a new title that they updated to 4K cinematic. But you can see like on Oblivion, they added all three formats, and that's what I've been seeing most lately is pretty much if a title gets announced that it has all three. Although like Reagan is only 4K cinematic SDR, so um, that one's kind of there has been some that have
Yeah.
been like that, but on 4K non-cinematic they only have it in SDR. So
Yep.
um,
Imagine.
so that's just a limitation of whatever the studio is providing. So
Yeah, there are some outliers. Like Bohemian Rhapsody is another one that I had a customer contact me about. Like, hey, like there wasn't a Dolby Vision, or there. It's like this movie's only in 422, but it's an HD 4K cinematic HDR10. I'm like, oh, that's one of the edge cases where there's not even a 4K Dolby Vision, so there's no 4K cinematic Dolby Vision. It's
yeah,
4K HD.
so
They got,
yeah,
but
so they only had that one version, and it happened to be 422.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
some of these I had downloaded for sure because I mean we can see
but
it
again,
here.
I would tell people don't obsess over that. Like even 422 is more chroma resolution than we had before.
Yep.
It's not, again, like sure, in an ideal world, everything would just be 444 and stuff like that. But we're talking about something that ultimately at the end of the day, I wouldn't overthink it.
Yeah, yeah, I do like the idea of like this is my default format, or like maybe even like a format hierarchy, like
Yep.
that I can specify. That would
Yeah, and the
be.
other thing I asked for, and I know Mike Cobb has said they are working on this, is if you go and, like if I click on the 4K cinematic like you have right there, and then you go to the video sort, it only has 8K and 4K cinematic.
Oh, up here.
Where I said it'd be nice if I could sort by 4K cinematic HDR10, because again, like I was only downloading stuff that was HDR10.
Mhm.
So, without having the ability to sort it like they already have there for the standard 4K, I have to go title by title and see what they've done, where that I would be able to actually sort it by that. And he said that that is something they're going to be adding. So
That's
we'll
good.
see that at some point. But again, like if they fix the other issue, does it really matter? I don't know. So,
Well, like, ultimately, everybody needs to make a choice, right? Do you go with
yep,
the DV, or do you, presuming that you have support for DV? If you don't even have support for DV in your system, then I think it's a slam dunk to just go with the HDR10. If you have
exactly.
some
Yeah.
level of DV support,
Really,
then
it only becomes the thing if like if in my system, let's say I had two Strato Ks and I had one downstairs on a flat panel and one upstairs, and I'm like, I know my flat panel does better with Dolby Vision, but I don't want to use Dolby Vision in the projection room. That becomes more of a thing because it's like I don't really want to download two versions of something. But if you're in a situation where it doesn't really matter, I. But again, I honestly, it's win-win. Like, if you go with the Dolby Vision one, you'll probably be fine. You go with the HDR10 one, you'll be fine.
yeah.
The odds that you're going to see a difference between these two seems pretty low, unless there's a mastering error. Like Blade Runner 2049, I don't know if they've fixed this yet, but the 4K Dolby Vision cinematic version of that, the black levels are all artificially raised.
Hmm.
So like immediately you notice that there are, everything's kind of grayish. But the HDR10 and the SDR version doesn't have that problem. I don't know if they've done an update for that yet, but like again, like you get into those kind of situations where like some random thing is wrong or whatever. But
Trying to think if I recall downloading that one twice. I feel like there's two or three titles that I've downloaded in cinematic, and then they got another upgrade in the interim time. It's cool as well that we've got some cinematic TV series too starting to pop up more. Yeah, it can be a little tricky to kind of track the format upgrades and stuff as well. And like my movie update list is full, but now they're putting in updates of format, even though it's like I don't really want to download this, but I can't get rid of it from being in my my update list. So eventually, probably it is an indication, though. I think a
On
lot of
the
these photos that have popped up in regular DV, I think that probably gives us some good data that they're gonna all of this stuff is gonna be in cinematic eventually. So
Yeah, the front page, I kind of keep an eye on the front page. It says 4K cinematic and 8K. That's showing you titles as they've been coming out, whether it's an update or not.
yeah,
If you click on, so you're in the page where they're all sorted. Originally, they told me that if you click the sort by, there used to be a thing called based on Kaleidoscape something, but I don't see that anymore.
this
And they
one
said that if you
date added
yeah,
to this. Yeah,
see, but date added to the store, if you click that now,
yeah, it
it's
doesn't.
saying that the newest title is, yeah, isn't the newest title.
Yes. Yeah.
And I complained about that, and they said, no, you got to do it by, it's called like Kscape rating. Let me see if I go to movies browser
Hmm.
and then I say sort by. See, on my phone, it has the ability to do that where it's called Kscape rating, but I'm not seeing it on their webpage. Um, but that would sort it by that. So I don't know, maybe that's something that Mike Cobb can tell me why it's not doing that, because he showed me that and I was like, oh yeah. And he's like, yeah, just sort it by Kscape rating, but that's not showing up all of a sudden anymore on there as a sorting by. But it looks like the default sort, like if you don't have anything clicked, is by um what new to old in terms of actually releasing it. It doesn't on the all movies. That's sorting by like popularity. But if you go back to step and then go down and click 4K and cinematic, the top, yeah, the where it says it there, the white writing, yeah, then right now it's sorting by when it actually did get updated or added, as opposed to where date added to store is definitely not. That's based on the actual title itself,
Yeah.
of on any format. So
Yeah. All movies date added to the store, which used to show format upgrades. So like if something was HD and it got a 4K release, it would be like new to the store and it would be at the top of that list. Because that was one of the ways that I would use. I used to look to see, okay, did anything get an HD to 4K update to maybe grab the digital offer or something like that. But hopefully this doesn't go away, because this is, if you want to track the, like exactly what we're saying, or you want to track the releases of the cinematic stuff, this is the one to
yeah,
bookmark.
that's the one to look at. Yeah. Somebody just asked the question. I wish it would give an option to remove the lesser versions too. I don't understand what that means. Like when you download, it should only be downloading one version unless you have multiple displays. And then it'll recommend downloading two versions so that you're compatible. So like if I have a Strato C and a Strato K, if I have both connected to the system and I go to a movie and I say I want to download it, it'll actually check the highest version for both players because it knows there's an incompatibility issue. So if I said, I want to download, I just bought the Mario movie again, like Mario Galaxy or whatever,
Yeah.
it will default to trying to download two versions because it knows that one of them's not compatible with the other and it wants you to be able to play it on both. But if you only had Strato Ks in there, it would only show one download option. I don't understand what he means by remove lesser versions other than the supplement stuff.
Yeah, this is
Um,
for meaning. I think the comment means if they. So I don't have something that I can show this directly with. I don't have this. Yeah, exactly this. If you have a non 4K C format already on your system, and then so like if I had Oblivion on my system in 4K HDR10, now the cinematic version came out today. I would come in here and I would choose to download just the 4K cinematic version, but that adds the 4K cinematic version to my server where the 4K HDR10 version already
Yeah,
is.
so you have to manually go in and
So
delete the other one. And you
exactly.
could do that. So I don't know if I could, can I share my page?
Yeah. Let me remove my share
S-
and you can share yours.
How do
If,
I?
on the StreamYard, down on the bottom is a um, like a little icon with a plus and a screen in it, is what I see. If you hit that, there's a share screen, and then you can share a window or share a full screen. What they need to do is when you go into the store and you say, okay, I want to download a 4K cinematic version, right in that format selection, it
No,
would be
I
all.
get it. So go ahead and I shared mine. I don't know if you could bring it up. Okay, so I'm trying to think of a title here that I could do this with. Um, let's say that I know I have something in here that I haven't downloaded yet. Uh, Hangover. Okay, so if I go to the Hangover right now, it's saying so I could download, whatever. And this is what I was talking about. Like I have to go in here and change this to, I don't want this version, I want that version. But right now, I know I already have this downloaded. So what
Yes.
I typically do is when I see this title come up, the first thing I do before I download it is I'll go to here and just hit delete, and that
Mhm.
deletes the other version. And then as soon as that goes away, I click download, unless I want to keep it on there to compare it. So like if I wanted to do this title, I would have popped this up, hit delete, say yeah, delete, and then it will just say title is deleted. And then I'd go here, I would change this and say that, and then hit OK. And then I would download that. And because this one has, when I do that, it says includes extras, me
Yeah.
being who I am, I would go here to downloads. And like right now, I've already got stuff from today that's coming out. I would, if this was like, say, this is Notting Hill and this was Notting Hill's extras, I
Mhm.
would click this and say remove the extra so that it doesn't ever download it.
You don't
Um,
use extras on your Kaleidoscape.
no, I don't. No, if I want, something specific that's in the extras, I'll download it. But 99% of the time, I'm just, going to download the movie and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. That's good.
um,
That's a good workflow. That I'd overlooked the fact that there was the delete right in the window. Because what I was going to suggest is like when you're choosing the formats in that pop-up that comes up, if they showed you, okay, these are all the formats available, check the ones you want to add. Right below that, they could say these are all the formats that you already have on your system. Like deselect the ones that you want gone. You could do it in one operation.
yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to skin the cat for sure.
Yeah. But
But like I
this
said, the big thing I'd like is just something in your account
yeah.
where you say that, my preferred video format is X.
Yeah.
And then what it would do is like that would be the default. But
Mhm.
let's say that mine was 4K HDR10, 4K cinematic HDR10, but they don't have a 4K cinematic HDR10. So like let's say like this title would only have 4K SDR. When I hit download, it would just default to whatever the next best is,
Yeah.
since it doesn't have my preferred. But in any other case, it would always just do that. And then that way, when I click this, I would, it would say it's going to download 4K HDR. But if for some reason I wanted something different, then I can come here and just say, like, oh no, for this title, I'd rather have this before I hit download. So again, like I mean, they obviously give you the ability to do this. I just think it would
Mhm.
be easier if instead of having to do this every time. And it's funny is Talo, who's the head of Kaleidoscape, said that he's the same way. He's like, yeah, I always have to click this, and I don't do the extras and stuff like that. So he's like, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that means that. But I mean, that sounds simple, but I don't know how this interface and stuff works. So there might be a lot of stuff they have to do on the back end for that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it would need to be like a decision, almost a decision tree kind of thing to set up. Um,
Yeah.
I agree with you. This Red Techie's other comment, this is what I was concerned about as well, because I thought they had said something like this on the owners forum, which was if you
Yes,
delete before you
you
download,
do.
you
Yep.
lose the movie will drop out of a collections that it may have been a part of or some stuff
I
like
think the
that.
same things happen with scenes. So,
Yep.
like if you have scenes already done, if you download the new version before you offload the old version, your scenes stay. but if you delete and then download the new version, it doesn't, or there's something to that. I don't use a lot of that stuff that much, and I don't use the haven't watched thing much because I just use the cover art wall.
Mhm.
In the other menus, the only thing I ever really use is like new, like what's been downloaded recently, so I remember if there's something I wanted to look at specifically for something. But yeah, I mean there is stuff like that for that because that other menu has stuff like that, like paused or already watched versus or whatever. So yeah, that would probably mess with that.
Yeah, the big
So
that's been the main reason I've done the download then post delete process. But for me, it's mostly just collections. I do put my movies in collections, but because the movies are in the system are a little transient, and the watch history isn't global, I don't watch history isn't a big deal for me. But if something dropped out of a collection that I put it in, and then I have to go back and put it manually back in that collection, it's kind of a workflow pain, I guess. But cool. Um, all right. All right. Real last question, then we'll wrap it up here. This is a good one as well. So, what are your favorite movie scenes to show off audio and video nowadays? I mean,
you know, 10 years ago, I had this conversation with somebody recently. 10 years ago, that you can get rid of my screen if you want.
okay.
Um, I could just hit stop sharing. But 10 years ago, um, it was so easy. It'd be like, oh, this is the new show off movie. Like, unless it was like The Fifth Element, which I felt like was like the movie for 4 or 5 years or whatever. I don't know. Like, we're getting to the point now where like there's just so much good video out there.
Mhm.
It isn't like it used to be where it was like, this or that or whatever. Like nowadays, I mean, even it's just so much good that I stopped remembering like something that like really stood out,
Mhm.
other than the ones that pretty much everybody else talks about. So when everybody asks me that question, I start drawing blank. I'm like, oh, what was something that like,
Yep.
um you know um because there's just so much to choose from.
Yeah.
um that it's hard to answer that question. Like I've been looking at a lot of these cinematic titles over again, and some of the ones that really kind of stood out there is, like I said, Moana just looks amazing. That's just something where like, like every time I look at it, I'm just like, God damn, this looks so good. um and it has a really good soundtrack, especially like that whole opening sequence kind of thing like that.
Mhm.
Sicario, when it came out in cinematic, that looks absolutely amazing. It's kind of dark movie, but it in terms of like the what it's about and stuff, but really good show off. Cars looks amazing. um let's see here. I
Yeah. I
mean,
always
a lot
try
of
to think
these.
with this question too, and for me, it's always just recency bias. Whatever I watched most
Yeah,
recently.
that happened to look really good. Blade Runner 2049 looks pretty amazing. A movie that's in 4K cinematic that it looks great, it sounds great, and everything, but it's not really an AV demo movie. But it's just a movie that I happened to go see it in the theaters when I was on a trip. I had a free night and I went to a movie and I saw it, and it's been one of the best movies I feel like I've seen in a long time that nobody's heard of. And they have it in 4K cinematic, that I would highly recommend to anybody looking for just something to watch that they haven't seen is Tuner.
Mhm.
It is just an absolutely fantastic movie, and it looks and sounds great. It's not a demo movie, like it looks and sounds great, but it's not a movie you're gonna show off your home theater with and stuff. But if you're just looking for a great movie to watch, that's definitely one I highly recommend.
Nice.
Um, so
Cool. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Anything you want to plug? Any calibration trips? You're looking for more to
no,
add?
like I said, I am going out to Colorado at the end of this month. I'm pretty booked up. If somebody is in the area, in the Denver kind of I-25 corridor that's looking for calibration work, I might be able to fit them in, maybe. I am going to be doing tours later this year. I will definitely be going to Texas. And when I say Texas, that usually means from Dallas to San Antonio along that corridor, and then Houston. So I'm usually kind of doing that like right
Okay.
there and stuff like that. So I'll be in Texas at some point. I'm hoping to do Florida before the end of the year as well. There's a chance I might fit one more in. I'm not sure. It might be the DC kind of area, or it might be like from Nashville up to like Louisville kind of area there. I'm not sure which one it'll be or if I'll be able to squeeze it in. My wife travels a lot for work and a lot more than she used to. So I have to balance that because we have kids at home and stuff like that. So if you're in any of those areas and you're looking for calibration services, reach out, deepdiveav@gmail.com. Happy to help you out. But yeah, I appreciate the time, Jeremy. Always fun to talk to you. So
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we'll get back together in a few weeks post CEDIA and recap or something like that too. If
yeah,
uh,
for sure. Especially if there's like cool stuff or just, hey, what did you see that you liked versus what I saw that I liked? So
yeah, sweet. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Yeah, uh, fun time, good discussion, great engagement, and be back next week. Thanks everyone.
thanks everybody.